phone felt slick in my sweaty palm. I didn't recognize the area code, a string of digits that hummed with an unsettling familiarity, like a half-forgotten nightmare. It rang again, a shrill, insistent bleat that sliced through the silence of my studio. I hesitated, my gaze drawn to a charcoal sketch I'd been working on, a cityscape twisted into grotesque angles, the building seeming to claw at the sky. A sense of foreboding, thick and heavy, pressed down on me. I picked it up. "Atwood," I croaked, my voice raspy. Silence. Just the faint hiss of static, like whispers from another dimension. Then, a voice, low and gravelly. A voice that seemed to scrape against my very soul. "John," it rasped. "We have unfinished business." The blood turned to ice in my veins. I knew that voice. I knew it with a certainty that defied logic. It was a voice I had prayed never to hear again. "Blackwood," I whispered, the name a curse on my lips. A dry chuckle echoed through the line. "Did you really think you could escape me, John? That moving to the middle of nowhere would be enough?" My hand tightened around the phone, the plastic creaking under the pressure. My gaze shifted to the window, where the late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows across the quiet street. A black car, gleaming like obsidian, idled at the curb. It hadn't been there a moment ago. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "Want?" Blackwood repeated, the word dripping with amusement. "I simply want what is owed to me, John. The contract. It remains in effect." I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles white. "The contract is null and void. You're dead." "Death is such a relative term, wouldn't you agree?" Blackwood chuckled. "And contracts, John, are eternal." He spoke of eternal contracts like they were mundane. Of course. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, an escape. There was nowhere to run. He had found me. Again. "Leave Sarah alone," I growled, my voice raw with desperation. "Sarah?" Blackwood sighed. "Such a sweet, innocent creature. It would be a shame if something were to happen to her." A wave of nausea washed over me. I thought of Sarah, tending her garden, her face radiant in the summer sun. I couldn't let him touch her. I wouldn't. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice defeated. Silence. Then, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Paint, John. Paint again." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind reeling. Paint what? Another portrait? Another soul to corrupt? I looked out the window again. The black car was gone, but I knew he was watching, waiting. A single playing card fluttered to the ground near my feet. I picked it up. The Queen of Spades. It was blank, completely devoid of ink, except for one detail. Scrawled across the center, in what looked like dried blood, was a familiar number. 666. My blood turned to ice. My legs felt like lead, and I had a terrible premonition. He was going to want me to paint something worse than before. Something far, far worse. I heard a sound upstairs, a floorboard creaking. "Sarah, dirt." "Sarah," I yelled, scrambling to my feet, fear clawing at my throat. "Get out of the house, now." No answer, just silence. And then, a child's laughter. Not a happy laughter, not a sound of joy. No, this was something altogether different. Something unnatural. Something that made my blood run cold. I bolted for the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was already too late. But what was up there with my wife? My fingers trembled as I fumbled with the lock. The air inside the house hung thick and stagnant, heavy with a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. A melody, tinny and distorted, drifted down from the second floor. A child's nursery rhyme played on a broken music box. My pulse hammered in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that followed. Sarah hated music boxes. The first step creaked under my weight, the sound amplified in the oppressive stillness. Each step after was a struggle, my legs heavy as if mired in thick mud. The nursery rhyme started again, the notes slightly off-key, each repetition a tiny needle pricking at my sanity. My studio was on the second floor, next to the master bedroom. As I reached the landing, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. A tall, gaunt figure, just beyond the periphery, gone before I could fully register it. My breath hitched. Hallucination, I told myself. Stress. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The door to my studio was ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me. The music box seemed to be coming from inside. I pushed the door open slowly, my hand reaching for the rusty pipe I kept tucked behind a stack of canvases. A pathetic weapon, but better than nothing. The room was bathed in an unnatural gloom, the afternoon sun somehow failing to penetrate the grimy windows. My half-finished painting of the seascape sat on the easel, the colors muted and lifeless. The air was colder in here, a distinct chill that seeped into my bones. And there, in the center of the room, was Sarah. She stood perfectly still, facing away from me, her blonde hair cascading down her back. She wore a white nightgown, the fabric clinging to her form in a way that felt wrong. In her hands, she held an antique music box, its porcelain surface cracked and discolored. The melody tinkled on, a maddening loop of childhood innocence twisted into something sinister. "Sarah?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What's going on?" She didn't respond, didn't move, just continued to cradle the music box, the unsettling tune filling the room. "Sarah, please," I pleaded, taking a step closer. "Talk to me." As I drew nearer, I noticed something else. A faint shimmer in the air around her, like heat rising off asphalt on a summer day. And the smell, acrid and metallic, like blood and ozone. Then, she turned. Her eyes were wide and vacant, pupils dilated to black pools that seemed to swallow the light. Her skin was pale and translucent, stretched taut over her bones. She smiled, a slow, deliberate movement that didn't reach her eyes. "John," she said, her voice a hollow imitation of Sarah's, a puppet mimicking human speech. "He wants to show you something." A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't Sarah. This was something else, something wearing her skin. The music box stopped. Abruptly, the silence that followed was deafening. Sarah, or whatever it was, extended her hand, beckoning me forward. In her palm, nestled amongst her fingers, was a small, intricately carved wooden doll. A puppet. It resembled me, but it was a grotesque distortion of my features, a caricature of my pain and failures. "He made this for you," she said, her voice flat and toneless. "He wants you to play with it." I recoiled, a primal fear gripping my heart. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this doll was more than just a toy. It was a conduit, a link to something dark and malevolent. Behind her, the shadows deepened, coalescing into a tangible form. A tall, gaunt figure emerged, his features obscured by the gloom. But I knew who it was. I could feel his presence, a cold, suffocating weight that pressed down on me. Blackwood. He stepped into the light, his smile a predatory curve. His eyes, burning with an unholy light, locked onto mine. "Welcome back to the game, John," he rasped, his voice a chilling echo of the phone call. "It's time to paint." The doll. It lay in Sarah's outstretched hand, a grotesque effigy of myself. The wood felt strangely warm, almost feverish, against her cold skin. I didn't want to touch it. Hell, I didn't even want to look at it. It was wrong. Profoundly, fundamentally wrong. A violation. "He wants you to play with it," Sarah, not Sarah, crooned. Her voice, a horrifying parody of my wife's gentle tone. Each word a hammer blow to my sanity. Blackwood emerged fully from the shadows, a specter of malevolence given form. His suit seemed to absorb the light, rendering him a silhouette against the dim backdrop of my studio. His face, gaunt and predatory, was etched with an amusement that chilled me more than any threat. It was the glee of a puppeteer, watching his marionettes dance. "Come now, John," he said, his voice a silken rasp that slithered through the air. "Don't be shy. It's a gift. A gift. From the devil, wrapped in Sarah's stolen voice and presented with a doll that mirrored my deepest insecurities, a gift I wanted to hurl into the sun. I took a step back, bumping against the easel. My seascape wobbled precariously. I reached out to steady it, anything to avoid looking at the thing in Sarah's hand. "What do you want, Blackwood?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a little too long, a little too sharp. Such a blunt question, John. Can't we just enjoy the reunion? The art? He gestured towards the doll with a languid wave of his hand. He wants you to paint again, John. But this time the canvas is different, more intimate. My blood ran cold. I knew what he meant. The doll. He wanted me to paint the doll, to imbue it with something, some essence of myself. And I knew, with a certainty that bordered on madness, that whatever I put into that doll would come out somewhere else, somewhere far more dangerous. "I won't do it," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I'm done painting. I'm done with you." Blackwood chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound that seemed to rattle the very windows. "Are you now, John?" I seemed to recall a contract, a rather binding agreement. He took a step closer, and the air crackled with a strange energy. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, pressing down on me. Sarah, not Sarah, remained motionless, her vacant eyes fixed on me, the doll still extended in her hand. "Think about it, John," Blackwood whispered, his breath cold on my face. "Think about Sarah, about what might happen to her if you refuse." He didn't need to elaborate. I saw it in my mind's eye. Sarah, broken, twisted, a mere husk of the woman I loved. He could do it. I knew he could. My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to hit him, to tear him apart. But I also knew that any physical attack would be futile. He wasn't flesh and blood. He was something else. Something ancient and malevolent. Something that existed beyond the realm of human comprehension. "What do you want me to paint?" I asked, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Blackwood's smile widened, a predator sensing weakness. A predator with a taste for art and souls. "Paint the truth, John," he whispered. "Paint what you truly are. Paint your despair. Paint your fear. Paint your masterpiece." He nodded towards the doll. "Begin." The doll felt slick in my grasp, like a freshly skinned animal. Miniature, grotesque and tuned, mocking. Each tiny imperfection, each exaggerated line, a reminder of my own failures, magnified and distorted. I stared at the blank canvas, the pristine white at taunt. Blackwood wanted truth. He wanted despair. He wanted me to bleed my soul onto this damned puppet. Sarah, not Sarah, washed, her eyes like chips of obsidian. Blackwood hovered, a dark cloud of anticipation. The music box sat silent now, a malevolent trinket of fractured innocence. I picked up a brush, my hand trembling. What color to begin with? Black? Too obvious. Gray? Too lifeless. Red? Tempting, the color of blood and fury. But no, Blackwood wanted despair. Despair wasn't red. It was the color of dust, of ashes, of dreams long dead. I mixed a muddy brown, a shade that mirrored the grime under my fingernails, the stain on my soul. The first stroke felt like a violation, a defilement of the blank surface. I painted the eyes first, two hollow sockets that stared back at me with accusing emptiness. The doll's eyes, or rather, the eyes of the warped little me it represented. The brush moved almost of its own accord, guided by a force I couldn't control. I added shadows, deep and festering, beneath the eyes, painting the lines of exhaustion and regret that had become my constant companions. The air grew colder, a bone-chilling draft that seemed to emanate from the doll itself. The smell of ozone intensified, mingling with the cloying sweetness that still lingered in the room. A low hum filled the air, a vibration that resonated deep within my chest, making my teeth ache. I glanced at Sarah, not Sarah. Her expression hadn't changed. Vacant, unseeing, Blackwood, however, was practically vibrating with excitement, his eyes gleaming with an unnatural hunger. "Yes, John," he whispered, his voice a sibilant caress. "That's it. Let it flow. Let it all out." I painted faster now, driven by a frenzied energy. I added the lines around the mouth, the grim set of determination that masked my inner turmoil, the furrow in the brow, etched deep by years of worry and self-doubt, the slump of the shoulders, the posture of a man defeated. The details emerged with horrifying clarity, a portrait of a broken man, rendered in miniature. I painted the hands, gnarled and calloused from years of grasping at dreams that always seemed to slip through my fingers. The fingernails, bitten down to the quick, a testament to my anxiety. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging the studio into near darkness. Sarah, not Sarah, swayed slightly, her vacant gaze momentarily losing focus. Blackwood hissed, a sound like escaping steam. "Concentrate, John," he snapped. "Don't falter now." The lights stabilized, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a burning sensation that spread through my limbs. It felt like my very life force was being drained, siphoned off into the doll. The room spun. I blinked, trying to clear my head. Something had changed. The doll, its expression. It wasn't just a representation of despair anymore. There was something else there now. Something hungry. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on the doll's lips. Its eyes seemed to gleam with an inner light. And then, a voice. A tiny, whispery voice that seemed to come from inside my own head. "More," it rasped. "I need more." I recoiled, dropping the brush. It clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. Blackwood grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "Don't stop now, John," he snarled. "You're almost finished." I looked at the doll, its miniature face now a grotesque parody of my own. Its eyes, burning with an unholy light, stared directly into mine. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I wasn't painting the doll anymore. The doll was painting me. I stumbled backwards, away from the easel, away from the doll, away from Blackwood. "Sarah," I croaked, my voice barely audible. "Run." Sarah, not Sarah, turned her head slowly, her vacant eyes locking onto mine. The doll in her hand seemed to pulse with a dark energy. And then she smiled. A real smile. A smile that sent a jolt of terror through my very soul. "It's too late, John," she said, her voice now clear and strong, but utterly devoid of emotion. "He's already here." The doll twitched in her hand, a jerky, unnatural movement. Its miniature mouth opened, revealing rows of tiny, needle-sharp teeth. And then, it spoke. In my voice. "Hello, John," it said. "It's nice to finally meet you." The room dissolved into a swirling vortex of darkness. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that my masterpiece was complete, and my soul was damned. A guttural growl filled the room as shadows materialized and swirled to trap me in a prison of my own fear. The puppet was about to dance with a vengeance. The photograph felt slick with a cold sweat against my palm. A boy. Not a monster. Not a ghoul, but a boy. 10 years old, maybe. Eyes wide with the kind of trust that's only found in those who haven't yet learned the world is a meat grinder. Blackwood wanted me to paint that, to capture that, and then twist it, corrupt it, like adding a drop of poison to a wellspring. I wanted to vomit. His purity, Blackwood had purred, the words coated in arsenic honey. His soul, the nerve of the man, the sheer, audacious gall. To stand there in my studio, surrounded by the ghosts of my ambition, and ask me to become an instrument of damnation, to paint away innocence, stroke by stroke. I had told him no, flat out. The word had felt good, a small, fragile act of defiance against a force that felt as old as time itself. But then he'd smiled that smile, the kind that promised not pain, not exactly, but the slow, agonizing erosion of everything I held dear. Success, Sarah. My sanity. He'd left the photograph on the easel, A silent, accusing presence. The kid's face now seemed to mock me. His innocent eyes were like twin spotlights, burning into my conscience. Sleep was a battlefield that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the boy. Then Blackwood, his face dissolving into a grinning skull. Then Sarah, her eyes wide with the terror I knew was meant for me. The photograph felt like it was radiating heat now, burning a hole in my hand. I slammed it face down on the table. No. Copped. I wouldn't do it. I couldn't. Even if it meant losing everything. Even if it meant... What? What exactly did Blackwood have planned for Sarah? The thought clawed at my insides, a cold, gnawing dread. I had to do something. But what? Call the cops? Tell them some demon in a suit wanted me to paint a kid's soul out of existence? They'd slap me in a rubber room faster than I could say 666. I paced the studio, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Each creak a reminder of the deal, the contract, the inescapable web I'd spun for myself. Maybe I could warn the boy, find him, tell his parents. But how? All I had was a photograph, a single stolen moment in time. And even if I found him, would they believe me? Some raving artist babbling about demons and corrupted souls? My gaze drifted back to the easel, to the seascape I'd been working on before Blackwood's arrival. The colors seemed dull now, lifeless. Even the ocean, which I'd tried to imbue with a sense of vastness and freedom, felt trapped, confined. Like me, I picked up a brush almost without thinking, dipped it in black paint, not to paint the boy, not yet, but to paint out the sun in my seascape, to turn the sky a bruised and angry purple, to reflect the darkness that had taken root in my soul. The black spread across the canvas, a creeping stain that devoured the light. I painted with a fury, a desperate need to express the terror that was consuming me. The brushstrokes were jagged, violent. The painting was becoming a monster, a reflection of my own internal landscape. And somewhere, deep down, a part of me knew that this was exactly what Blackwood wanted. He wanted me to embrace the darkness, to become one with it. And with each stroke, I was getting closer. Closer to losing myself completely. Closer to condemning not just the boy's soul, but my own. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, making me jump. I dropped the brush. It clattered to the floor, leaving a smear of black paint on the worn wooden planks. I stared at the painting, my heart pounding. It was hideous, twisted, a perversion of everything I had ever strived for. But it was also honest, too honest. It revealed the ugliness that I had tried so hard to hide, not just from the world, but from myself. I grabbed a rag and began to scrub at the black paint, desperate to erase the image, to reclaim some semblance of hope. But it was no use. The black was ingrained, permanent, like a stain on my soul. I collapsed into a chair, defeated. The boy's face stared up at me from the table, his innocent eyes a silent accusation. What was I going to do? The rain started again, drumming against the windows, a mournful rhythm that echoed the despair in my heart. I was trapped, and I knew, with a bone-chilling certainty, that Blackwood was waiting, patiently, eagerly, for me to make my choice. And the clock was ticking. The words hung in the air, thick and noxious. Sarah, a blank canvas inhabited by something not her, stood transfixed. Blackwood, an undertaker's dream, merely watched. The boy's photo, a taunt. My blood ran cold, a sluggish tide receding from my extremities. "John, you're scaring me," Sarah had said that morning, before the possession. The memory felt like a phantom limb, aching with a pain that was both real and imagined. Now, only the echo of her voice remained, warped and distorted by the presence that had taken root within her. The contract. I'd thought I could outsmart it, outrun it, that a few signed lines on fancy paper could bind my soul to this thing. The arrogance of it. I was a fly caught in a spider web of my own making, and Blackwood was enjoying the show. I tried to conjure up the old Sarah, the one who saw the good in me even when I couldn't see it myself. The Sarah who brought me coffee in the morning, who kissed away my doubts. who believed in my art. But she was gone, replaced by this vacant shell. The numbers pulsed in my vision, a malevolent countdown to some unspeakable horror. 666. They were branded into my brain, etched onto my retinas. Every shadow seemed to twist into their shape. Every sound echoed their rhythm. They were the soundtrack to my descent into hell. Blackwood's smile, a razor-thin slash across his face, widened. It was the smile of a predator who knew he had his prey cornered. The kind of smile that made you want to crawl under a rock and die. "Have you made your decision, Mr. Atwood?" he asked, his voice a low, velvety rumble. It was a rhetorical question, of course. He already knew the answer. He'd orchestrated this whole damn nightmare. I wanted to scream, to rage, to tear him apart. But I was paralyzed, trapped in a waking nightmare. I wouldn't paint the boy, I thought. I couldn't, even if it meant. His fingers snapped, a sharp, decisive sound that cut through the silence like a gunshot. The lights flickered, died, plunging the room into darkness. A darkness that felt alive, that pressed in on me, suffocating me. Then, just as suddenly, the lights returned, and Sarah was standing beside him. Not my Sarah. This thing. Her eyes were vacant, devoid of life. Her face was pale, almost translucent. She looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful but broken. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice cracking with fear and despair. She didn't respond, didn't even blink. She was a puppet, and Blackwood was pulling the strings. Blackwood chuckled, a sound like the rustling of dry leaves in a graveyard. "A little incentive, Mr. Atwood, to help you make the right choice." Incentive. That was rich. He was holding my wife hostage, threatening to destroy her soul, and he called it incentive. He didn't need to spell it out. I knew what he wanted. If I didn't paint the boy, Sarah would suffer, in ways I couldn't even imagine. He wouldn't say how, but I knew it would be terrible, unspeakable. I was trapped, checkmated. There was no escape, no loophole, no deus ex machina waiting in the wings. I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand, and the stakes were higher than I could ever have imagined. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, "I'll do it." The words tasted like poison on my tongue. Blackwood smiled, a triumphant, evil smile that sent shivers down my spine. He had won. Again. He released Sarah. She crumpled to the floor, a broken doll. I rushed to her side, cradling her in my arms. She was sobbing, but her eyes were still vacant, unseeing. The tears felt hot on my skin, like acid. I held her tight, my heart breaking into a million pieces. I had condemned her, and myself. To what, I didn't know, but it was coming. The boy's photo was on the easel, waiting for me to destroy it. The portrait was my new mission. A deceptive calm settled over me as I agreed. The false quiet of a graveyard before the lightning strikes. Maybe, just maybe, I could pull this off. Maybe I could paint a lie so convincing Blackwood wouldn't see through it. I envisioned a portrait of Sarah, yes, but a portrait of her strength. Her resilience, not her soul. A fortress on canvas, impenetrable to Blackwood's dark magic. Hope, it turned out, was a cruel mistress. Days bled into weeks, each brushstroke a battle. I started with her eyes, trying to capture that spark, that unwavering belief in the good, even when the world showed her its ugliest face. But Blackwood was there, always there, a shadow lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, whispering insidious suggestions. "A touch more weariness, John," he'd murmur. A hint of resignation in the curve of her lips. The colors fought me. Every attempt to paint her vibrant spirit resulted in muted tones. Ashen hues that reflected the growing despair within me. The studio air became thick with a suffocating dread, the scent of turpentine mingling with the unmistakable tang of sulfur. Sarah, meanwhile, remained distant, a ghost in her own life. She moved through the apartment like a sleepwalker, her eyes fixed on some unseen horror. The light in her smile had extinguished, leaving a haunting emptiness that mirrored the canvas. One afternoon, while I was struggling with the portrait's background, she spoke. "He likes the color blue," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He says it reminds him of ice." My stomach twisted. Blackwood was inside her head. I abandoned the idea of a vibrant, protective portrait. The only truth I could capture was Sarah's slow and agonizing demise. The painting became a chronicle of her fading spirit. The vibrancy leached away, replaced by a ghostly pallor. The eyes, once full of life, became vacant windows reflecting nothing but the encroaching darkness. The final brushstroke felt like a death knell. A perfect likeness, yes, but a perfect likeness of a soul being devoured. A beautiful, haunting portrait of a woman already lost. I stepped back, my hands trembling, and stared at the canvas. It was a masterpiece of despair, a testament to Blackwood's power. I'd failed, utterly and completely. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I staggered, catching myself on the edge of my worktable. The room seemed to spin, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. When the world steadied itself, I heard a soft chuckle behind me. Blackwood. He materialized from the shadows, his smile wider than ever. He walked slowly toward the painting, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Magnificent, Mr. Atwood," he purred. "Truly magnificent. You have exceeded even my highest expectations." He reached out a long, pale finger and traced the outline of Sarah's face on the canvas. Then, his smile vanished. His eyes narrowed, focusing on some detail I had missed. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice suddenly sharp and dangerous. He stepped closer, scrutinizing the painting with the intensity that made my skin crawl. This isn't her soul, is it?" He turned to me, his face contorted with rage. "You tried to deceive me, Mr. Atwood." Before I could answer, he grabbed the painting and hurled it against the wall. The canvas ripped, the frame splintered, and Sarah's face was reduced to a jagged mess of paint and canvas. "You think you can trick me?" he roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the studio. "You think you can cheat the devil?" He lunged at me, his fingers closing around my throat. I gasped for air, my vision blurring. I clawed at his hands, but his grip was like iron. The room spun, the numbers flashed before my eyes, and I knew this was it. The end. But then, just as I was about to lose consciousness, he released me. I stumbled backwards, coughing and gasping for air. He turned away, his face a mask of fury. "You will pay for this, Mr. Atwood," he snarled. "You and your precious Sarah." He snapped his fingers, and the studio vanished. The portrait was done, or as done as it was ever going to get. A sick parody of beauty. Sarah's likeness stared back at me, but the eyes... God, those eyes. Empty, hollow, vacant as a condemned house. They saw nothing, felt nothing, reflected nothing but the black void that had taken root inside her. I'd tried. Jesus, I'd tried to fight Blackwood, to sneak past him with brushstrokes of love and defiance, but it was no use. He was always there, a cold hand guiding mine, twisting my intentions, poisoning the well. Sarah was slipping away, bit by bit. Stolen moments and stolen glances. He was peeling her soul off like wallpaper, layer by agonizing layer. I'd wanted to warn her, to lay bare the horror of the deal, the creeping darkness that was consuming us both. But she was beyond reach, cocooned in a silence that even my screams couldn't penetrate. Distant, cold, a fragile porcelain doll, wound too tight, about to shatter into a million jagged pieces. I knew, with a certainty that settled like lead in my gut, that Blackwood had already taken something precious, something irreplaceable. Her hope. That's what fueled him. That's what gave him power. He feasted on despair, and we were serving it up to him on a silver platter. The painting itself seemed to hum with a low, malevolent energy. The colors were too vibrant, too real, almost as if Sarah was trapped inside the canvas, screaming silently for release. A perfect cage, a soul rendered on linen. I showed it to him. The son of a bitch. He stood there, bathed in the sickly yellow light of the studio, his eyes gleaming with a satisfaction that made my skin crawl. "Beautiful, Mr. Atwood," he said, his voice a silken caress. "Truly beautiful. A masterpiece of emptiness." He reached out a long, pale hand, his fingers twitching as if eager to possess what lay within the canvas. He wanted to touch her soul, to claim it as his own. Something snapped, a wire short-circuiting in my brain. The years of fear, the years of desperation, the years of slow, agonizing defeat. They coalesced into a single, blinding rage. I roared, a sound primal and guttural, and lunged. He went down hard, a surprised grunt escaping his lips as I slammed him against the floor. The painting, the damned painting, was within reach. I grabbed it, tore it from its frame, and ripped it to shreds. Canvas ripped with a satisfying sound. Sarah's painted face, once so perfect, was now a mangled mess of color and texture. "I won't let you have her," I screamed, the words raw and ragged. "She's mine." Blackwood laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed through the studio like the devil tuning his fiddle. He rose to his feet, brushing himself off with a dismissive flick of his wrist. His eyes, those eyes, burned with an unholy light, the pupils dilated to pinpricks of pure malice. "You can't stop me, Mr. Atwood," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You made a deal, and now it's time to pay the ultimate price." He raised his hand, a slow, deliberate gesture that sent a shiver down my spine. The air crackled with energy. The room began to shake. The walls groaned, fissures spider-webbing across the plaster. A nauseating stench filled my nostrils, the unmistakable odor of sulfur and decay. The floorboards vibrated beneath my feet. Something big was coming. Something bad. He was going to take everything. My soul. Sarah's soul. The souls of everyone I had ever loved, ever cared about. He was going to drag us all down to hell with him. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. The end was here. But instead of oblivion, something else happened. A warmth spread through my body, starting in my chest and radiating outwards, engulfing me in a wave of energy. It was the same warmth that was there when my daughter was born. The same warmth that came when I was a kid, running in the field under the sun. I opened my eyes, and the real hell began. The air hung thick, tasting of ozone and regret. Blackwood was gone, reduced to nothing more than swirling ash motes dancing in the studio's gloom. He was a bad memory, a burnt offering. Sarah lay still, a broken doll abandoned on the floor. I knelt, cradling her head, my fingers brushing against the silken strands of her hair. She was alive. A faint pulse thrummed beneath my fingertips, a fragile promise against the encroaching darkness. But the victory felt hollow, tainted. I'd won, yes, but at what cost? The studio, once a sanctuary, was now a charnel house, reeking of something ancient and evil. The remnants of Blackwood's presence clung to the walls, a psychic residue that made my skin crawl. I lifted Sarah, her body limp in my arms. She was light as a feather, as if her very essence had been drained. The rain outside had intensified, a relentless drumming against the windows, a mournful soundtrack to my despair. Each step was agony, a testament to the unseen wounds that crisscrossed my soul. The city was different now, the familiar skyline warped and distorted by the events of the night. The streetlights seemed to glare with a malevolent intensity, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced in my periphery. Each alleyway seemed to whisper secrets, each doorway a portal to some hidden dimension. A rat scuttled across the sidewalk, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural intelligence. It paused, regarding me with an unsettling curiosity before disappearing into the darkness. The taxi ride was a blur, the driver silent and impassive, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer condolences. He just drove, his face set in a grim mask of resignation. The hospital was a sterile, antiseptic world, a stark contrast to the chaotic darkness I had left behind. The doctors and nurses moved with an efficient detachment, their faces etched with fatigue and indifference. Sarah was whisked away, her body disappearing behind a maze of gurneys and stainless steel. I was left alone in the waiting room, surrounded by the anxious faces of strangers, each grappling with their own private hell. Hours crawled by, each minute an eternity. I stared at the clock on the wall, his hands ticking with a relentless precision, mocking my helplessness. The numbers swam before my eyes, blurring into a meaningless jumble. A fly buzzed incessantly around the room, its droning a maddening counterpoint to the silence. I swatted at it, but it evaded my grasp, continuing its relentless dance around my head. Finally, a doctor emerged, his face grave. Sarah was stable, he said. She had suffered a severe trauma, both physical and psychological. It would be a long road to recovery. He offered platitudes, reassurances, but his words rang hollow. I knew the truth. Blackwood had taken something from her, something that could never be fully restored. I sat by her bedside, watching her sleep, her face pale and peaceful. I wanted to tell her everything, to confess my sins, to beg for forgiveness, but I couldn't. The truth was too terrible, too monstrous. It would shatter her fragile sanity. I watched her chest rising and falling with a rhythmic grace, each breath a precious gift. I vowed to protect her, to shield her from the darkness that still lurked in the shadows. I knew it wasn't over. Blackwood was gone, but the evil he represented still lingered, a malevolent presence waiting for its chance to return. The numbers still haunted me. 666. They appeared in the room numbers, in the television static, in the patterns on the wallpaper. They were a constant reminder of the deal I had made, and the price I had paid. I leaned closer to Sarah, whispering promises into her ear. Promises of a new life, a fresh start, a world free from fear and darkness. But even as I spoke, I knew it was a lie. The darkness would always be there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to resurface. A cold dread settled deep in my bones, a premonition that the worst was yet to come. Sarah stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, like trapped moths struggling against the glass of their prison. A low moan escaped her lips, a sound that tore at my already frayed nerves. I held my breath, watching, praying for a sign of recognition. A flicker of the old Sarah behind those vacant eyes. But there was nothing. Just a blank, unsettling emptiness that chilled me to the bone. The doctor had warned me about this. Amnesia. Dissociation. The mind's way of protecting itself from unspeakable trauma. He'd said it could be temporary. Or permanent. I couldn't bear the thought of her lost forever. Adrift in some shadowy realm where I couldn't reach her. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to force her back to me. But I knew that would only make things worse. Patience. That's what they'd told me. Patience and gentle reassurance. Easy for them to say. They hadn't stared into the abyss. They hadn't made a deal with the devil. After what seemed an eternity, her eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, drifting aimlessly around the room. Then, they locked onto mine. A glimmer of something flickered within them, a spark of recognition that sent a jolt of hope through my weary soul. "John," she whispered, her voice weak and raspy. Where are we?" Relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. She remembered me. At least, she remembered something. "We're safe now, Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. "We're in a hospital. You're going to be okay." She frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Hospital? What happened?" I don't remember. The truth hovered on the tip of my tongue, a bitter poison I knew I couldn't swallow. How could I tell her about Blackwood, about the portraits, about the soul I'd almost lost? How could I burden her with the knowledge of the darkness that clung to me like a second skin? It would break her. I knew it would. "You were sick, Sarah," I said, choosing the lie. "Very sick, but you're getting better now." She searched my eyes, her expression filled with uncertainty. "Sick, but I feel empty, like something's missing." The pang of guilt was like a knife twisting in my gut. Something was missing. Her memories, her joy, a piece of her soul, perhaps. And it was all my fault. "You'll remember everything soon," I said, forcing a smile. "Just rest. Let yourself heal." She closed her eyes, exhaustion etched on her face. "Okay, John," she whispered. "Okay." I sat by her side for hours, watching her sleep, my mind racing with plans for the future. We had to get away, far away, to a place where Blackwood couldn't find us, where the numbers couldn't haunt us, a place where Sarah could heal, where we could rebuild our lives, brick by painful brick. That's why we left. Packed everything we owned, stuffed it into an old car, and drove until the city was nothing but a distant memory fading in the rearview mirror. We ended up in a small town nestled beside the sea, a place where the air smelled of salt and seaweed, where the pace of life was slow and deliberate. I found work as a carpenter, building houses, mending fences, working with my hands. It was honest work, simple work, a welcome contrast to the dark complexities of the art world I had left behind. Sarah seemed to thrive in the quiet atmosphere. She spent her days tending a small garden, filling our little cottage with flowers. She smiled more, laughed more, and the emptiness in her eyes seemed to lessen with each passing day. But the numbers never went away. They were subtle, insidious, woven into the fabric of our new lives. 666. In the dates of old newspapers stacked in the corner store. In the address of the house across the street. In the price of a loaf of bread at the local bakery. I tried to ignore them, to dismiss them as coincidence, but they were always there. A constant reminder of the deal I had made, and the darkness that still lurked within me. One day, a new family moved into town. Nice folks. The father was a retired teacher. The mother, a nurse. And they had a son. A boy with bright, innocent eyes and a trusting smile. He reminded me of the boy in the photograph. The one I almost painted. I saw him playing in the park one afternoon, laughing as he chased pigeons across the grass. He was carefree, innocent, untouched by the darkness that had consumed my life. A pang of guilt shot through me, a deep, visceral ache. I knew that the evil was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. I had to protect him. I had to protect them all, because the deal was never truly over. It was just dormant, waiting for the right moment to be rekindled. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that one day, Mr. Blackwood would return. Or someone like him. The boy tripped, tumbling to the ground. He began to cry, his small body racked with sobs. Without thinking, I rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. Hey, I said, my voice gentle. It's okay. You're all right. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears. I scraped my knee, he whimpered. I smiled, trying to reassure him. Let's take a look, I said. I gently brushed the dirt away from his knee, and that's when I saw it. Crawled into the skin, just below the scrape. 3 small digits, barely visible but unmistakable. 666. His eyes met mine, and he smiled a smile. No child should have ever smile. A smile far too old, far too knowing. And he said, "He sends his regards."